Hallo und ein herzliches Willkommen zum heutigen Freda Forumstalk, der gleichzeitig eine kleine Reihe von Europagesprächen startet. Es gibt in Europa sehr viel zu besprechen. Manche Dinge betreffen uns alle oder fast die meisten, weil wir sind Europa, und manche Dinge betreffen manche mehr und manche weniger. Bei der heutigen Ausgabe unseres Freda Forums Talk freue ich mich sehr, eine aktuelle und eine frühere Europaparlamentarierin begrüßen zu dürfen. Das ist mir eine große Ehre, freut mich riesig, und unser Moderator wird euch dann auch persönlich vorstellen. Kurz zur Erklärung: Freda ist die Grüne Zukunftsakademie, die Parteiakademie der Grünen in Österreich. Mein Name ist Dagmar Tutschek, ich bin die Obfrau der Freda, und Freda Forumsgespräche dienen dazu, Zukunftsperspektiven für Grüne und Grüninteressierte zu entwerfen, gemeinsam zu diskutieren und zusammenzuführen. Das heutige Gespräch wird in Englisch stattfinden. Für alle, die lieber auf Deutsch zuhören, Sie haben unten auf Ihrer Leiste im Zoom die Möglichkeit, ganz rechts auf Dolmetschen zu klicken und können dort ganz einfach die deutsche Tonspur auswählen. Fragen können Sie über die Funktion F&A stellen. Wir werden die Fragen im Hintergrund sammeln und dann an die Moderation weiterspielen. Und ich bin sicher, die eine oder andere Antwort wird sich wunderbar ausgehen im Laufe des Gespräches. Das Gespräch ist immer auf 75 bis 90 Minuten eingestellt, je nachdem, wie viele Fragen kommen und wie sich die Diskussion entwickelt. Ein Hinweis noch: Alle unsere Freda Forum Talks werden auf YouTube live gestreamt und sind daher auch auf YouTube, unserem Channel, unter Freda abrufbar. www.freda.at, dann einfach auf YouTube klicken und dort können Sie alle Gespräche nachhören. Jetzt darf ich an unseren Moderator des heutigen Abends übergeben, Michael Schmidt, langjähriger Kollege im Rahmen der Parteiakademie, langjähriger Obmann in Wien, vielfältig unterwegs mit einem journalistischen Background. Ja, und er wird uns heute durch dieses Gespräch begleiten. Herzlich willkommen und vielen Dank, Michael.
Dankeschön. Thank you very much. I'm going to change to English right now. I'm very glad to welcome Monika Vana, current member of the European Parliament, of the Green Party in the European Parliament for Austria, and Jean Lambert. She is a former member of the European Parliament and a very great expert on all what has to do with Brexit. Yeah, Jean starts laughing. So we're gonna start with a nice question to Jean. I was very glad to learn that Brexit has made British fish happier and better. They're free and independent now. It was, I suppose, it was just a conservative politician who told us. So I would be interested to know, what about the UK citizens? How does it feel now to be more independent or completely independent? And do you have more money in your pocket now since you don't have to pay any kind of contributions to the EU budget? How does it feel to be completely free and independent from Europe?
Well, I think it depends on your position, whether you supported leaving the European Union or not. But what we are seeing is that even some people who supported leaving, like, for example, many fishermen, are not at all happy with the outcome. That their markets for fish are more difficult, it costs them more. They really feel the government has done a very bad job on their behalf. So for those of us who thought it was a bad idea all along, I think at the moment, overall it's difficult to say, because the COVID pandemic has sort of masked some of the effects. you know. But what we are already seeing is that it's more difficult for some parts of the country, for Northern Ireland. Things have been very difficult. We know that a lot of particularly small businesses are finding it much more difficult to do business now with the European Union, much more expensive. We know that a lot of consumers are finding that when they get their goods that they've ordered from somewhere in the European Union, they're now having to pay a lot more because they're now having to pay customs duties. So there's that very nasty surprise that you can pay almost as much again as you know, for delivery and your goods as you thought you were paying. So there are all of these warning signs which are saying that things are more difficult for a lot more people. But I think at the moment, there are a lot of people who don't really see a difference. You know, it depends where you are, what sort of, what your buying habits are and so on. But I think we're going to see things once we start coming out of some of the restrictions from this terrible COVID pandemic. We will then start to see more and more difficulties and more problems.
Okay. Thank you very much for the moment. Yeah, I have to change in between mood and the other option. We'll leave it for the moment. Just Moni, I would like to ask you something completely different, since within the last 20, 25 years, we've experienced dramatic loss of solidarity. So money and the capital markets rule the world, and this new kind of empire has it's situated in the city of London. So if we are well, on the continent, if we look at the situation, we might say, okay, fine, we get rid of all those gambling boys and gambling girls in the offices in the city of London. Might be an advantage for us. So perhaps solidarity will come back to Europe, to good old Europe. Do you think that's going to be?
This is a very nice question, because I'm asked very often, of course, as a left-wing and green politician, why are you against Brexit? Why are you so sad that UK has left? Because UK is one of the most active veto players in Europe and against social policy and other things. First of all, I really want to say thank you for this discussion today, to see Jean again, who I deeply miss, and all of your colleagues from the United Kingdom. We miss you really deeply. So at least in the European Parliament, you are really, really missed for your very good and pro-European work. But coming back to the question, Michael, indeed, EU stood together strong in the Brexit negotiations in a kind of solidarity. And also, when you look at the recent social summit in Porto, some interpret this as a step towards a more social union, for example. But I would not go so far that solidarity is coming back, because, you know, the UK was a pleasant excuse for all other member states. For example, they do not want a stronger EU. And of course, okay, this excuse is gone now, but there are some other groups popping up that are strongly against more social integration or more European integration. For example, when you remember the negotiations on the EU budget, yeah, there are the so-called frugal four. Unfortunately, Austria, my own country, was among them. Together with, for example, Netherlands, Sweden and Denmark, against the stronger EU budget and against common debts for the recovery. So that was a very bad group from my point of view. Then we have the Visegrad countries led by Hungary and Orban and Poland and others that are against the rule of law and against the new rule of law mechanism, and even against human rights. When you look at, for example, LGBTIQ-free zones in Poland or the authoritarian regime of Orban. And then you have some other groups popping up case to case, for example, for pushing more subsidiarity and against a strong Europe, as I mentioned, was the case at the Social Summit, where 11 member states wanted to vote against the minimum wage directive that we would desperately need for more solidarity in Europe. So there's not automatically more solidarity just because the UK has left. But Brexit has shown, I think, the other EU 27 that EU must be a success. Otherwise, EU will lose the trust and the support by the people. When you look at the opinion polls, for example, in Austria, we are traditionally EU skeptical country. And I think the pandemic and the huge effects of the pandemic, they have truly raised the question of what should EU be and how much solidarity do we need in Europe. And I think we are towards more solidarity, but not because of Brexit, absolutely not, but because of the pandemic. Of course, that's tragic. But when you look at the successes the EU had in the last year, for example, the recovery fund, the rule of law mechanism, a very good multi-annual EU budget with strong climate goals, gender goals, the Green Deal, the vaccine program against vaccine competition in Europe. Of course, it wasn't always working good, but overall, it's a success, I think. So we are moving towards more solidarity, and I think we need that, but it's not because of Brexit.
Thank you, Monika. I have prepared another question for Jean, but I would like to ask you another question that has to do with a solidarity question Monika was talking about. Since we saw that the vaccine program in the UK worked pretty good, pretty well within the I don't know, last 2 months more or less. So we all had the impression that the UK, that was not very, very famous for its social politics, and now they started to work on a program which has to do a lot with solidarity. Is that because now they feel so free and independent, and now they can do it what they couldn't do before because they had to obey the strict regulations of the European Union, or did it just happen by accident and Mr. Johnson is just a lucky guy?
I think it's a mix of, certainly there was, I think one could, how can you say? I think that one of the things that the UK did do very well was to actually place contracts with a range of different places, and also really put money into research. Part of that is, I think, because we have some very good people, very good international teams, which I think the government doesn't always recognise. So we have that. The government acted very fast on that. They acted very slowly on other things. I mean, the number of deaths in the UK, at the start of this was dramatic. And I think, when the government began to see sort of what was happening there, that also really pushed them to take action on the vaccine side. I think also they saw a lot of what was happening in EU member states. I keep wanting to say in other EU member states. My head is still with you, So, but they saw what was happening in EU member states about the amount of money being put into the economy to support people who could no longer work, where businesses had to close. So I think they saw some of what was happening there and really acted on that sort of support, which I have to say was very positive and very surprising for a Conservative government. But then this Conservative government likes to pretend that the last 10 years were not Conservative governments as well, okay? We had that from a government minister this week. In fact, the government minister of health, when challenged on, you know, having been in power for 11 years and other governments, other times. So they see themselves as different, but they did, I mean, they invested a lot in the various vaccines. The fact that what's the AstraZeneca vaccine now, which here tends to be called the Oxford vaccine. So we have claimed it as British, the Oxford vaccine. As I say, international company, international team developing it, but it's British, okay? And the fact that we sort of passed that for use relatively quickly was used certainly by the government as a bit of, again, of national propaganda. We have acted when Europe could not, you know, when Europe didn't. We have been able to act more quickly because we're no longer in the European Union, which was totally untrue, but this government is famous for lying or stretching the truth. I mean, Moni will know from having seen Nigel Farage over the years that taking one little bit of truth and going like that is his speciality. So Boris Johnson is the same mold. So, you know, that was used as the British are doing, you know, look, we've had Brexit sort of a few months ago. Here we are immediately able to act and act more independently. So that has been the public narrative. And it's been taken up by the press. And then, of course, when we saw the real political mistake, I think, from the European Union, or certainly in the way it was expressed about restricting vaccine exports across the border between the Republic of Ireland and the North, that was really seen as, oh, here is the European Union trying to stop, you know, trying to invoke Article 16, etc., which the British government had just done, but, you know, the government doesn't talk about that. So it has been, the whole of that has been used as very much propaganda about now we're free of the European Union, look what we can do, even although, of course, the truth is we could still have done that within the European Union. Nothing would have stopped us. There may have been, you know, a slight delay, but, you know, nothing would have stopped us doing the same thing. So that's the story. And in terms of the solidarity, I think what we will see now is how long that solidarity lasts. Because during the last year or so, you know, during the pandemic, as I say, we've seen government support for people who can't work because their companies are closed. We have seen an increase in welfare benefits for that period, which has made a huge difference to a lot of people. And the question now is, will the government remove that increase in future because the labour market opens up, or will it continue to support some of the very poorest? I mean, one of the other things we've seen in this pandemic, and it's not alone in the UK, is the huge number of people who've been reliant on things like food banks just to keep them alive during this pandemic. And, you know, the government is seeing that as some sort of success. And it is, it's a success of civil society, but it's a failure of the government to support the poorest people in the country. So let's see what happens once things begin to shift and, you know, a bit more life comes back into the economy.
Thank you, Jean. You mentioned a very important word. It was the public narrative. The public narrative concerning the Brexit, or concerning Brexit, as well here in some newspapers and some magazines, is Brexit is a result of a people's vote. So the voters decided, was not the elites, it was the average people, it was not the politicians. And so this might be the best evidence of a lively and firm democracy. That's what you can read in newspapers and magazines. That's what people tell about it. And as you mentioned, so the word propaganda and public narrative, and that Johnson and his people are very gifted in this field. I would like to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's true, it was a public vote with a very high percentage of voters, some of whom never normally vote in a general election or whatever. That's true. So, you know, on the vote itself, that's accurate. But I mean, I've done election observation with European Union teams at various points. And when we observe an election against international standards, you don't just look at what happens on the day. You look at the campaign beforehand, and you look at how balanced was that campaign, what information did the public have, who was able to speak in that campaign, who was able to vote in that campaign. And you know, then of course you have the election spending, you have all of these things that you take into account when you evaluate how balanced, how fair, how reliable that result was. And, you know, I mean, the UK does elections well from a technical point of view. I mean, we do. But if you look at the campaign, we all know it's very difficult to win an election campaign just in the few weeks of the election. It's everything that's gone before it. And we had a long time of very negative stories about the European Union. A lot of the press, very negative stories. I think a lot of people in our national parliaments, our local level, who didn't really understand what the European Union did or why it mattered. When you were listening to some of the debates during the referendum campaign, and it's true, you had both sides represented, members of the European Parliament from the Remain side were virtually never there. It was national. And I was reading a bit of an interview yesterday with a leading Labour politician at the time, a member of Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, who said that the view they had was that this was mainly an internal problem for the Conservative Party. Labour didn't really need to get involved in it very much because the referendum would be won. So there was this assumption all the way through, I think by many, that the referendum would be won and therefore you didn't really need to campaign. This was a problem for the Conservatives. And I think if there's one big lesson from the referendum that I think those who are supporters of the European Union have to take on board, it is that even when, and I think, you know, my own party was guilty of this, that when you are critical of the European Union, when you say it is not doing enough on climate, on solidarity, on asylum, or whatever it is, you have to remind people why it matters that the European Union is active on these things. That it is because we work across borders, because there are values that we think it's important that the European Union carries, and not just to be critical. Because in the referendum, it then became quite difficult at times to say to people would say to you, but look, you've said this about the European Union's trade policy. You said this about it's inadequate on this, it's inadequate on that. Why do you want to defend it? So we have to keep that door open for why the European Union matters and to make the case for the European Union, even when we're critical. Because otherwise we have these forces and they run across the whole of Europe who want to see the European Union fail. You know, so I think that's the big, you know, the big thing is people have to understand why the European Union matters. And in the UK, they hardly ever heard that. So the fact that 48% of people actually came out and supported the European Union, given the hostility of the press, the UKIP party, the hostility of many in the Conservative Party, etc., was good. The rest of us didn't do a good enough job.
So what I hear a little bit is that democracy elections, or the results of those elections, are as well a question of power. Who has the money? Who has the power to tell the people the truth or something else? And if you're critical of the union, you have to talk. You have to talk more, obviously. So if it's all a question of power, a question to Moni now. In the past we saw three huge countries, three big countries. It was UK, it was France, it was Germany. They had the power to do the agenda setting, and so if one of those big, huge, large countries with a lot of influence has left now, so is this a chance, since they are not, France and Germany won't be that powerful as they were together with the UK, might this be an option, an opportunity to get the Union, the European Union, as we all are a little bit critical of the European Union, I suppose, might that be an opportunity to make the European Union a little bit more democratic? Do you think so?
Of course, it's a question of power on the one hand, but it's first of all a question of the political values and the political will, and also ideological positions, much more than of a size of a country. That's what I believe. I'm 20 years now into European politics, and for me the problem is not, for example, France and Germany voting together, because to be clear, Macron and Merkel are both true pro-Europeans. But the question is, are the structures of the European Union really democratic? And I think not. Yeah, and you know, the Greens are very much working for many years now already, and especially in the European Parliament, for a more democratic European Union. When you look, for example, on blocking elements for progress as the unanimity in the Council, yeah, that's one of the most blocking elements that we have. And for example, also the legislative powers of the European Commission, most of the people are even not aware of. Or that the European Parliament is still not a full parliament with the full right of initiative, for example, or not the full co-decision of the European Parliament in all political fields. For example, in the foreign and security policy, or in economic and monetary union, or in deals with third countries like CETA, or other deals, Mercosur, the EP is no co-legislator. So this is a really democratic deficit. And on the other hand, we still don't have such a European democracy, a European democratic forum that we need European citizens that can vote, for example, for transnational lists. By the way, there would have been a great chance with the Brexit to introduce transnational lists. We as Greens, I see Jean is saying yes, because you are really active on that we tried, and other groups in the parliament too, we tried to implement those transnational lists for the European elections, but it was the Conservatives that blocked this idea, and we still do not have it. So we now have the chance, by the way, with the COFE, what's the COFA? The COFA is the Conference on the Future of Europe that is lasting the next half years. And all the citizens can participate in this discussion. What is Europe about? What should Europe discuss? And first of all, which democratic structures should Europe have? And I think this is a very good idea to remove these blocking elements that prevent the EU from really being democratic. For example, as I said, unanimity in the Council, or also, for example, we don't have many elements of direct democracy, so we should really strengthen that. So that's not really a question of the Brexit, but is it easier without UK now to let's say more voting with qualified majority or something like that, so that we come without United Kingdom steps forward? It depends on what you look at, which topic. Closest allies of the UK, for example, were Sweden, Netherlands, and Denmark. And so they have now to work on the new alliances, as I mentioned, the Frugals and others. And I think where you already saw that the UK is not a real member anymore, was at the negotiations of the recovery fund and the new MFF. Because these are, let's say, from a green perspective, from a pro-European perspective, we have very good result. We have a strong MFF, a strong EU budget, a strong recovery fund with so-called common debts. And I think maybe Jean, you are of another opinion, but I think the British voice could probably have helped create a stronger opposition to the proposals, like going with the Frugals. So we see some progress, as I said before, in common solidarity and also in more democracy. But I think it's not really because of Brexit, it's because of other developments in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Moni. So I will pass this question directly to Jean. So your questions. What do you think about this point? If the UK was still in the European Union, do you think the Frugal 4, then the Frugal 5 would have blocked, I don't know, whatever, would have made the recovery fund a little bit smaller, would have blocked, I would say, money to move the recovery?
I think the issue about common debt would have been very difficult for for the British government. And I think you're right, Moni. I think there would have been some real pushback from the British on that. That even if we hadn't gone through the referendum process, if you still had a Conservative government there, I think it would have, and depending as to what sort of Labour government, that would have been difficult. I think so. I think you're right. I think there are things that have been done now that would have been more difficult or not have happened at all if the British had been there. And I must admit, when I was looking at some of the negotiations going on and some of the things on the table, I was thinking that, so that may be sort of one positive. Unless, of course, they thought there was money to be made from it, in which case that was another thing. But I think you're right on the common debt. That was difficult enough, I think, even for Germany. So for the UK, I think that might have been a red line.
So I would like to ask you. So if UK now has not to pay any kind of contribution to the European budget, to the EU budget, wouldn't be that an opportunity or a chance for a better distribution for the interior budget. So they do not have to lug on money they do not have, because they do not have to spend any money. So they can say, okay, there's no reason to be that frugal anymore. There is enough money. Britain or the UK has enough money, so we can do more, we can invest more, we can give more back to the people. That's what they always said. I want my money back. Perhaps the people want their money back.
Yeah, well, this is, and it was, of course, one of the things from the Leave campaign that money would then go to our National Health Service system. And of course, money has gone into that, but that's partly because of the pandemic. I think it will be interesting to see how the British government plays this, because I think it's also clear that, you know, it wasn't just a question of money in, as, you know, but also the money that the way in which your economy sort of benefited from being part of the European Union, which was not just about the contributions and who got how much. It was also about how easy was it to do business? You know, what were those opportunities? So therefore, what was it doing to your economy overall, which was much bigger than the contribution that we were making. One of the things that the government is now talking about, and it's partly because of the electoral success it had in the election at the end of 2019. I almost, you know, forget which year we're in now. But in seats which have been former Labour Party seats, and you know, what has now been called the red wall, that, you know, because the Labour Party colour is red, and that the Conservative Party gained seats there under our very, you know, electoral system. And so the government now is very much talking about having what it's calling a levelling up agenda, where it's saying, look, a lot of these seats are in the north, old industrialised areas, former industrial areas, in the north of the country. You know, the government's line now is there's not been enough investment in those areas because the evil elite in London take it all, which I'm from London, I don't take this view. But therefore we will now invest much more in the north. And, you know, whether that's going to be in infrastructure, in the railways, new roads, this sort of thing. They came out yesterday in the Queen's speech for the opening of a new session of Parliament with a new skills agenda. It's obvious they want to invest much more in those areas, which is a good thing. I mean, it is a good thing. The public transport and rail systems there are dreadful, but you know, there's a whole set of reasons for that. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if at some point we will hear a new story, a new narrative about we are doing this because we no longer have to give money to the European Union, and so we have money to invest in the north. They haven't said that yet, but somebody somewhere, you know, will come up with that, because of course they have to replace a lot of the you know, the regional funds. And I mean, Moni is an absolute expert on this. A lot of the regional fund money, the European Social Fund money that was coming into the UK from the European Union into more deprived areas. And the government has to find a way to replace that money. Theresa May, the previous Prime Minister, had promised to do that. We still haven't seen what that fund actually is, how much money is in it. So I'm sure that at some point they will say we are able to do this because we no longer have to give that nasty, horrible, oppressive European Union all the money, which will raise an interesting question because they had promised to give all the money to the National Health Service. So they're now going to spend it twice, presumably. But hey, if that's more public money, that's a good thing. But no, this is their new levelling up agenda, as they call it.
You were talking about the north. Do you mean the north
of England,
or are you are you talking about Scotland? Since well, we had elections in Scotland, and the Green Party was successful. Nicola Sturgeon was successful. The Conservative Party was not that much successful. And in Wales, you had some elections as well. So it was a success of the Labour Party and this. It's called Plaid Cymru.
Plaid
Cymru. Okay, Welsh is a bit difficult for me, and and whereas in England, Boris Johnson was pretty successful. So the Conservatives won some seats from the Labour Party. So could it be that within, I don't know, the next 10 years, 15 years, the United Kingdom is a separated kingdom, and so the money's gonna stay in England and won't go to the north?
Not the real north. No, you're absolutely right. I'm guilty of what I sometimes accuse others of, which is, being sort of Anglo-centric, English-centric. Now, I mean, it will be very interesting to see how Boris Johnson, how the government responds to these elections in Scotland and Wales, because there is now, there was before, but there's even clearer now, a clearer majority in Scotland for independence. The Greens in Scotland's the Scottish Green Party support that as well. So there's now more than a majority. The Greens now 8 members up from 6, and so we'll work with the SNP on that. It's not a coalition. Wales, different thing. Labour did well there, and interestingly, COVID has, we've seen a much stronger voice for particularly the Welsh Assembly, the Welsh Senedd, and the leader there in the COVID situation, because they have been in charge of many of the regulations. And so people have come to appreciate the powers there more. But yeah, it was a successful election for Labour in Wales. They won 50% of the seats, and it's a more proportional system than our parliamentary system. So in Scotland too. So Northern Ireland didn't have elections. So now we see a really strong move on the independence agenda again in Scotland. So what will Boris Johnson do? He doesn't want to give them a second referendum. I think there are a number of political commentators who think that what the government response will be to start spending more money in Scotland, and spending it directly in Scotland, not sending it through the Scottish government, the Scottish Parliament, but direct from Westminster, from the national government. And then, so if more money goes into the health service in Scotland directly, will people care about where the money's come from if things have got better? So it's this thing about, some people are talking about it as Boris Johnson having to love bomb Scotland, which I think is a revolting idea of being love bombed by Johnson, him wrapping his arms around you in any sort of way. But, in order to try and bring down the support for independence. So there's that possibility. I think he has another very big, very serious problem in what is happening with Northern Ireland, because the Scottish, get my head clear, Scotland has felt able to ask go for a second referendum now because of Brexit, because they say, look, the last referendum we were told if we wanted to stay in the European Union, we had to stay in the United Kingdom. Now we are out of the European Union. So if that has totally changed the terms constitutionally and politically for us, and therefore we demand a second referendum in order to go into the European Union as our own separate nation state. For Northern Ireland, Brexit has given a really difficult situation because you have a border, a land border with the European Union on the island of Ireland. Nobody wanted to put back a physical border with border checks there and so on, because it carries such symbolism and memories of, the bloodshed and the struggles in Ireland, Northern Ireland, the island as a whole, but Northern Ireland in particular. So nobody wanted to put a land border there, but a border has to go somewhere because we're out of the European Union. So now effectively you have a border in the Irish Sea between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland. And this again is creating all sorts of problems about costs, about border checks, about veterinary inspections, all sorts of things. So you have begun again to see political instability in Northern Ireland. And there's a possibility at some point there will be a call for a referendum north and south of the border about going to a united Ireland. So it's not just Scotland, it's Ireland as well. It's the constitutional repercussions of Brexit in the UK are enormous.
Very important thing. Thank you very much. So now I've got two questions from Moni. The one has come from some of the visitors. Someone wants to know if there is any kind of support for the Scottish Green Party. If the European Green Group supports the Scottish Green Party, whatever this might be. So I suppose they would like to come back. I think they would like to come back to the European Union. And is there any chance to give them some support from the European group, from the Green Group in Europe? Or what? Yeah, well. Okay, sorry. What's the future? What's the future for the relationship in between Scottish Greens and the Green Group in Europe?
You know, in the Green Group, the group in the European Parliament, unfortunately, we don't have any member of the United Kingdom anymore, but our relationships, of course, to the Greens in this area, they are strong. I think Jean can tell much more about it because Jean is in the board of the European Green Party. And of course, the European Green Party consists of much more countries and then Green member parties that are integrated in the Green Group in the European Parliament. So of course our ties to our colleagues in England, Scotland, Wales, they are unbroken. And of course we support them as much as we can. When you want to know about actual projects, maybe you ask Jean directly, because I think Jean knows more about it, as you are active at the moment in the board of the European Green Party.
Okay, Jean, would you like to do some comment on this at the moment, just now?
Yeah, I think that we're due to have a meeting, between some of the board members of the European Green Party and the Scottish Greens fairly soon to actually discuss this issue about how the Scottish Greens see the path to independence and what this would mean for the European Green Party and how we then, support it or not or whatever. Because I think, one of the things that the Scottish Greens are very clear about, and indeed the Scottish National Party are very clear about, is they don't want to see the sort of confrontation that was had over independence for Catalonia, where we've seen, Moni and I, some of our former colleagues who are now in jail on very long sentences there, because they wanted their independence. So very clear, as I say, the Scottish Greens and the Scottish Nationalists, they don't want to go through a path of confrontation like that. because also I think if they did, the chances of their being welcomed into the European Union would be very slim. I think there are some governments who would say, if you've come in through a route which is not consensual, doesn't have an understanding with the country, the body that you're leaving, this will set alarm bells ringing. I can imagine that the government in Madrid, for example, would not want the Scottish in on that basis. So what they're doing at the moment is taking very much a legal constitutional position and saying to government of Boris Johnson, this is the will of the people, expressed in this election. We will, when the time is right, be asking for a referendum. And of course, you, because you will stand by the will of the people, you should allow us that referendum. And it may end up in the Supreme Court. So there's that path. So for EGP, I think, we're likely to support them on that route. It will need, I think, a wider discussion as well in the European Green Party, because of course, the whole concept of nationalism for some Greens makes some Greens very nervous. The idea of a progressive nationalism is a concept that some Greens find difficult, because Greens tend to be very much about removing and reducing borders, not shifting them, so, it's a conversation to be had, but it will be had, it's already planned. And I think, everybody would love to see, well, hopefully the whole of the UK back in the European Union, but, I think for the Greens, we would certainly love to see the Scottish there. It's a question, how we can do that in a way that, is respectful and works.
Okay, thank you, Jean. There's one question that is, since we're from Austria, very important for me or for us, since the Eastern, Central and Eastern Europe countries around us have a different, the influence is a different influence. The influence of the Brexit influence and what happens now is a little bit different than for Austria, but it might have an impact on Austria as well, since a lot of people from Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, whatever, they went to the UK to work there, were talented, gifted people, skilled people, and now many of them come back to their countries now. You, Moni, you're an expert on Central and European countries. Yeah, you have this kind of Central European, Eastern European round table every year, so you're very close to those countries. Do you think that the people who come back from the UK, they might have been a little bit more open-minded than the ones who always stayed in their villages in the countryside? Do you think that might be an advantage for those countries like Hungary, like Poland, which are very, very conservative now, to change a little bit the situation, the political situation in those countries? So the exodus stopped. Some of those talented people come back, doctors come back, IT experts come back, craftspeople will come back, and they might be a little bit more open-minded. Do you think that that might be an opportunity for the development of democracy in those countries?
So indeed, there are, as you have mentioned, Michael, big labor market problems in the Central and Eastern European countries, as everywhere in Europe, by the way. And this is important. Rising unemployment, segregation of the labor market, gender pay and pension gap, young people not finding any stable job, new jobs arising like platform workers without any social security. So we really need deeply a so-called social union with social minimum standards. But to be clear, the Brexit is bad. It's bad for labor market in every way you can look at it, because the free movement of people, the free movement of workers and of families, the right to work and live without discrimination in another EU country, this is lost. And this free movement for workers within the European Union really was a fundamental right and a very important part of the so-called internal market, with the famous free movement, services, goods, capital, and people. And so these rights for the UK citizens are cut, or for EU citizens in the UK. And this is very bad for the people and for the system. And I looked a little bit at the numbers of Polish workers and the development of Polish workers after the Brexit referendum, because it might give an indication also for the future, but it's very difficult at the moment, to be honest, to make good prognosis, because we have pandemic effects. So we don't really know what is happening after the pandemic, when the possibility to move is given again. And we have also not really good data available. But what I found is that there has been effect in 2019 already for Poland. 100,000 people left the UK. But they said that Brexit was just one of the considerations for them. The kind of work, family, lifestyle considerations, they are at least as important. And finding good jobs is depending on economic situation, and now I come to the core of your question, the democracy. Of course, the social and rule of law situation in the country is of course important, but to be honest, I would be careful to talk about a so-called return of democracy. Yes, it's true that in Hungary and Poland, and I mentioned it already, the rule of law and democracy are deeply under attack. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that democracy has already been lost. I think that would be unfair, not least for all of the brave women and men in those countries who fight for upholding democracy and the rule of law already, and often with great success. For example, on the local level, if you look to Budapest, for example, we have a green mayor there. So I wouldn't give up these countries, and I wouldn't only connect the question of the future of democracy there with people or workers coming back because of the Brexit. This is a much, much broader question, of course. And I have another fear. I have the fear that not that many people will really come back from the United Kingdom, because on the one hand, you have the EU, the EU citizens that must stay there when they worked already before 2020. So they remain settled in the UK with their families, with all the EU rights. We have the fear, on the contrary, that many other workers that will not fulfill the criteria to stay or to move into the United Kingdom officially, maybe will stay or come into the United Kingdom irregularly, and will be exposed labor or more and more labor exploitation. And this is really a fear we have. Because, you know, the EU standards on social rights and labor rights, yeah, of course, officially they should not be downgraded. This is in the agreement that was voted in the European Parliament recently between UK and EU. There is a non-regression clause for standards, environmental standards, social standards, but at the moment, it's only on the paper. And if this is also in the future the case, and UK will fulfill this, that's the big question.
Thank you, Moni. Thank you very much. We're talking on democracy and solidarity. So I have a question to both of you. Where are the opportunities and where are the threats now in this special situation? Threats and opportunities for democracy, for solidarity, and since we notice a lot of neo-nationalism, what we see now, what might happen, might this be a chance to come back to the old idea of an Europe of the regions, not a Europe of nations, of countries, but a Europe of kind of a commonwealth of regions? Might this be an idea for the future? I don't know. Who will answer first?
I think this is where we both do after you. I don't think it's necessarily an alternative. I mean, as I think, at one time as Greens, we used to look at it very much as the regional, almost with a real reduction of power at the national. And I think that's, there's still some scope for that. But I think one of the things that we're seeing at the moment in Europe generally is a greater awareness about the potential power of cities and potential power of regional government. That if you look at, I mean, Moni was talking about having the Green Mayor of Budapest, and you look then at the link that has been made by him with mayors, from in Poland and other countries to basically almost stand up against their governments, to show, I think it's that the government, it doesn't represent the full country, that there are other places that have other ideas, and that certainly the push, I think, again, Moni can speak more about the push for funding to, the Greens have tried to get for funding to go to cities and, subnational government, when certain criteria are not met. So I think that's there. I think we have also the possibility as Greens to develop now our relationships with a new Green group in the Committee of the Regions. It's the first time we've had an official Green group there, and if you look at the results for the French Greens, for others, I mean, even in the UK, in Bristol, in the elections you mentioned last week, the Greens now have are now the same size in terms of representation as the Labour Party. So we'll see what happens there. And so I think that is becoming a much more important area in terms of the development of smart cities, in terms of, areas which are driving, for example, maybe not driving, are really engaging and with the, the whole sort of climate emergency action as well. So I think that is strengthening. And I think that is good. In terms of the neo-nationalist side, I think we still have a lot of work to do there. For the Greens and others, I know the new Green group has an anti-racist internal working group, which we didn't have in previous parliaments. So I think that work that needs to be done to still develop societies where people feel included, whoever they are, is really important. Because I also think that there is an agenda at the moment. We've seen it in the States with Trump. We've seeing it in the UK at the moment, and we're seeing it in Hungary. To actually divide societies, divide the different groups. And I think as Greens we can do something very powerful on inclusion.
Thank you, Jean. Now it's your turn, Moni.
Thank you. I totally agree with Jean. I'm personally, I'm not a big fan of the concept of the Europe of the regions, despite I'm in the regional committee and fighting, of course, against regional disparities. And indeed, the cohesion policy funding for the region is one of the biggest investment tool and very, very important also for the goals we have, like climate, gender, social innovation. But I think the cities are much more progressive, to be honest, yeah, and much more lively and relevant for the development of yeah, and also for solutions. Yeah, and I think the Conference of the Future of Europe now, as Jean has mentioned already, also is a chance now to go in this direction and to define the role of the cities, the local level, urban initiatives, citizens initiatives, much more broader. But in general, I think the EU must become finally an instrument for the people to build their future and not a vehicle for neoliberalism or rights of big companies as it was in the past. And one of the most important elements in the next years will be, it sounds a little bit technical now, but I'm convinced that I'm right with that, will be whether the European Union goes away from this strict budget criteria of saving money in the national budget, in the debt, so that we can invest, because we need to invest. Also after the pandemic and after the recovery plan. Of course, we have a great recovery plan now, 750 billion euros. That's not that bad for the next years, but it's not enough. It's not enough for the Green Deal. It's not enough for building up the social and health infrastructure we need. It's not enough for a public service offensive, and it's not enough for fighting against this big gender gap we now have seen also in the current crisis. So we will need more investment to build up Europe, and we must not leave it alone to the member state level, as Austria also wants it, by the way. I have to say it, unfortunately. I'm really not of the opinion of the conservative part of the Austrian government that says Europe should stay away from social policy and for big investments in social. We do it alone in Austria. Of course, Austria is a little bit better, of course, in the health care system, in the social system. That's no doubt. And we saw in the pandemic that those countries that have better systems, better social and health systems, they are more resilient to the pandemic, sorry. But of course, that's a European task of solidarity. And Michael asked this in his first question, and we always come back to the solidarity element. And we deeply have to reform the European Union, and we have to reform it now. This does not have to do much with the Brexit itself. It has to do with the future of European citizens willing to work together also cross-border, as she mentioned.
There's just that occurs to me now, title of a song, John Lennon, Patti Smith, Power to the People. You remember, I suppose. And as I listen to you, Moni, it sounds a little bit to me, power to people means more power to the mayors. Is that what you're aiming at?
Maybe not more power, but at the moment, I would be happy with more money for the mayors to make the good funding we need for the climate, for the gender projects, for the social projects, for the infrastructure, because we see in many countries, as mentioned before, that the national level really doesn't fulfill its task. And I think more money for the mayors would be the first step we are aiming for.
Jean, do you agree?
Was that very diplomatic, wasn't it?
Yes, very. Jean, do you agree?
No money without oversight. I think, you always need to check where the money goes, how it's being spent, etc. Whether that's and that's a combination, obviously, of who else is elected at the local level to do that, what the national level does, and what the European Union level does. Because money is nice, but spending it on what it's supposed to be spent on is really important. But I think that this is one of the challenges that the European Union faces. We know that in some countries, where if you look at Hungary, for example, where you have a government that really doesn't want to engage with a number of the projects, etc. And and therefore, when you've got other levels that do, how do you find a way of doing that respects the people, not just the government? And I think that's part of it. But I mean, in terms of sort of power to the people, I think it's empowering people is probably one of the things we also need to be looking at, is that sort of that quality of our democracy right the way through. And I think I think there's some excellent sort of projects that are run. And it strikes me too. You were talking earlier about freedom of movement, and one of the questions that did come up sort of around the time of Brexit was, I remember a Labour MP putting something out on Twitter about, what's a socialist argument to defend freedom of movement, and part of the answer to that has to be, this is empowered workers. These are workers because they have freedom of movement, because they have that choice. They have the choice to walk away from work. If you were there under the usual sort of migration schemes, you are often just linked to your employer, and therefore the employer has the power. You as the worker do not have the power to make choices. So that whole question about freedom of movement also being about empowering workers, empowering people, I think is something that we really do need to remember, because freedom of movement is one of the most sort of popular things with the population, a lot of the population, and this is one of the reasons for it. And for those who looking at sort of how people feel about that, how strongly they feel about it, I will do an advert, if that's all right, for this excellent book. Moni may have come across the group, but it's a book called In Limbo. There are 2 versions of it. And it's the testimonies of people, EU nationals in the UK, how they felt, what has been happening to them since Brexit. And there's another one which looks at UK nationals in the European Union and what has been happening to them. And, if you really want to find voices that advocate for the importance of European citizenship and free movement, those books are just amazing. But you have to have a very big handkerchief with you when you're reading them, because you will be in tears. But, about what people feel they have lost personally because of Brexit, the loss of free movement, or the shifting in who they felt they are, is really, really powerful. So,
okay, thank you. Empowering the people, this idea, I like it very much, this idea, empowering the people, that's cool. So let's come to an end. A very last question to both of you, and of course, might be kind of it won't be a conclusion, because it's just a question. What do you think, what should the future bring to the UK and to the European Union within the next, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years? Yeah, 20 years might be fine for us too. So do you think it will be a close partnership, a relationship without any kind of commitment, or a reunion? What do you think? What is possible? And since, well, it's not Christmas, it was Easter, but you might have a wish. So what would you like to have? You might say this as well. Who wants to start?
Maybe I start this time because it's such a wonderful question. Wishing something is like Christmas. Of course, if I had a wish free, I would wish no Brexit, of course. Yeah, this would be the best. But the second best, of course, would be a reunion in the future. But okay, it's up to the UK to decide which relationship they want, because, you know, the doors of the EU, they are open. Yeah, that's clear. Because from my point of view, we are so much connected through values, history, geography. UK is so similar to EU when you look at rules-based system, multilateralism, open economy and society. So, and it's such a, or it was such a strong element of the EU after the Second World War. You know, it was so important, such a big country. It was the third biggest country in the EU, the second biggest economy, and one of the leaders in foreign policy, security policy. So I still cannot believe that we are now without the UK, to be honest, in the EU, because it's so sad, and the UK was such a precious member, and it has such huge effects now on the people and on so many sectors. So let's see how the trade and cooperation agreement that I mentioned, that was now negotiated between EU and UK with the consent of the European Parliament, how this will work. Of course, the Greens will look on the correct implementation, especially on the standards. There is a clause in there, I mentioned this, level playing field. This means a no regression clause in the standards. This was very, very important for the Greens, for the European Parliament to fulfill. And finally, we got it, because the most important thing for the UK was the access to the internal market. And they were only granted this access in exchange to the level playing field and upholding the standards. Let's see how it works. And my last wish for shorthand would be that the UK would join again the Erasmus program, because leaving the Erasmus program for the students is really, really such a big loss for so many students, for their future, for their possibilities to get to know each other, the culture, the common understanding. And this is really cruel and short-sighted. So this would be my shorthand wish.
Thank you, Moni.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree on Erasmus. I think that, you know, for the UK not to have wanted to continue that says, you know, so much about where the headspace is of those making the decisions. And it seemed to me, and I think to many, such a sort of spiteful thing to do, that you're actually reducing the opportunities for exchange. And okay, the UK has put in place its new system, the Turing sort of scheme, but it's not reciprocal. You know, it's not, and it's almost as if we're trying to sort of cut ourselves off from our closest neighbours, which, you know, is ridiculous. You don't have to cut yourself off from the European Union in order to be able to offer opportunities to young people from the United States, from India or whatever. And for me, a lot of the symbolism that we've got going on in the UK at the moment is almost about trying to recapture empire, you know, when we were a colonial power. And I think some people haven't realized that we aren't that anymore. That, you know, our former colonies, you know, are powerful in their own right, thank you. It's a different relationship, you know, as India will tell you. So I think that as well with the sort of the immediate future, I think it is about trying to keep as many of the connections as we can at all sorts of levels, whether that's sort of local levels, whether it's professional bodies, whether, you know, whatever it is, that if governments aren't going to do this, people have to. And that we try and keep those connections as strongly as we can, and that we try and get a situation where there are still an awful lot of things left to negotiate, the details of various things within these agreements, and we review in 5 years from the, that we try and reduce the temperature and reduce the barriers so that we can actually have a relationship of being able to talk to each other, being able to cooperate without the British government making it look as if somehow cooperation is weak. And I think this is something that's there in the British system, the idea that somehow if you cooperate, you are giving up power, rather than if you cooperate, you are sharing power. You are you increase your power because you're with others. So if we can find a way to break down the barriers, as many of the barriers that we have, to try and make business work as smoothly as possible, that we try and stay on board together on things like climate ambition, on human rights, those sort of things where we should be able to cooperate, because it's in the interests of ourselves, it's in everybody's interests that we do that. That would be great. And 20 years time, who knows? Maybe the UK will have come to its senses and decided that, it's tried it by itself. It didn't work. And it would really like the European Union to take us back, please. But it will be quite some time. I think we've broken a lot of trust with our European partners. And, they will want to be sure that we really have reformed and really want to stay this time as full partners, not with one foot out the door.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks to you both. It was a great talk, great for me. It was fantastic to have you here. And so, as you both had a wish, I will have I have a wish from me. I would like to have a follow-up with you. Another talk, I don't know when, we have to organize that. I would like to talk with you about cities, the importance of cities, the role model of cities, and perhaps we can do it next time live in Vienna, not on a Zoom conference, but live in Vienna, and have a nice glass of wine afterwards, if you like. So, thanks for watching. Thanks for participating, and have a nice evening. Thank you very much. That was it.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Freda for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And very good to see you, Moni.
Yes, indeed. Such a pleasure. Have a nice evening, Jean.
And you, thank you.
See you at the EGP Council.
Yeah.
Okay.
For insights. Bye-bye.
Bye. So.